Control is dead.
Long live Control.
Next on Eternal Durdles.
Stop! Animal stuff! Can you see animal stuff? But that would go.
Big shout out to all of our Patreon supporters. If you want to support the channel, you can go to patreon.com/eternaldurdles. In return, you'll get ad-free content and a bonus episode every single week. Thanks for watching. Hello and welcome to Eternal Durdles. I'm your host, Zach Clark, and with me as always, Phil Bleckman. Phil, how's it going, man?
Zach, finally on the cast, somebody who can speak to Control with authority. Welcome back, Fenris Cloud.
Yes.
Back not to talk Infect, but to talk about what I am unable to accomplish. You are a successful Control mage.
Apparently.
Tell us the secret. Tell us the secret.
Fenris Cloud, the best known Control mage there is, right?
Yeah, you're moving off of Infect, and you've lately, I subscribe to your Patreon. Links below for Sam's Patreon.
Nice.
But lately you've been doing sort of a dual content thing where you put out a little bit of Control content, a little bit of Jeskai Control content, and sorry, did I say Control content? Infect content, and a little bit of Jeskai Control content. And you recently top 8 two relatively large events with Jeskai Control.
Yeah, exactly. So before people get a bit afraid, no, I haven't quit Infect. Just let me put that out there. But I do want to play more decks. That was my my ambition for after getting sponsored by Wizards. You get the DB grounds. I think you both have them as well. You can play all the cards that you want, which is really nice. So I figured I'm going to play some different decks. And I've been struggling lately in tournaments where they'd see me and it's like, oh, here he is. Here's Infect guy, right? So they keep an opening hand with Mountain 6 lightning bolts, and it's fine. Yeah. They did nothing else, and it's just it's silly, right? Because you can keep trash hands, but you know what you're up against, so they are suddenly good. And when I was looking for a different deck, I was searching for a deck that's the furthest away from Infect as I could, that I still felt like I wanted to play. And I've always loved Control. I like playing a lot of Magic. I like playing decks that feel impactful and making decisions that are important. And one of my best friends, which is probably the best Magic player I know, is always on Jeskai Control. And he taught me how to play the deck. And now I've been, we've been working on it together. And I feel like now, after playing it for 6 months, something like that, I'm starting to get to know the deck really well. And it's also because Infect was basically unplayable before the bans. The Psychic Frog matchup with Reanimate was just... Trust me, I've tried everything I could, but I just could not make it work. And now I've actually considered going back to Infect for this tournament, or both of these tournaments. But I ended up, after playing over 6 months with Jeskai Control, this is just a deck that I'm currently most proficient with. So I figured I want to try and win these because it was ELM qualifiers. So I'm just going to play the deck that I currently know the best. But I guarantee that I will soon be playing Infect again, because now people put me on Jeskai. So next time they see me, I can surprise them by making their opening hands horrible.
It's always nice to have a pivot. I know that Phil has no idea what that's about. Everyone knows Phil's on miracles every time he steps up to the plate.
But what kind of miracles, Zach? Who knows?
What kind of miracles? That's the real question when they're keeping their hand. It's like, ooh, I wonder what kind of miracles Phil is on this time.
Zach, as long as we're not talking about putting win conditions in our decks, we're okay. Everything will be fine.
Well, yeah, that's where I wanted to start with this, Sam, is tell us about the style of Jeskai Control that you're playing.
Mm-hmm.
Eternal Durdles is proud to be sponsored by Moxfield.com. Moxfield is the best deck building website on the internet. You can find all of my and Phil's decks in links below, including decks from this episode. And if you do, you'll be directly supporting the channel.
So the style of Jeskai Control that I'm playing currently is basically, as Phil just said, not many win conditions. That's the idea. So in my recent list, I've been playing 2/4 Lingus, which is pretty stock in Jeskai these days. I'm also playing what I would call technically not win conditions, but in reality, yes, they are win conditions. For example, I consider Back to Basics to be a win condition against certain decks as well. Same goes for Tamiyo, Inquisitive Student. If you ultimate, sure, the game's it's not a win condition, but I'm going to draw half of my deck. The game is effectively over, right? And then I also play the Wandering Emperor, which is indeed a win condition. And I also currently have the 4 Narset combination with 1 Days Undoing. So if you Days Undoing, sure, the game's not over, but they're not going to do anything else, right? So I think the deck has a lot more secret win conditions, if I can call them like that, than it may actually seem. That's currently the build that I'm at, but what I have recently done after the bans is including for, in my opinion, probably the best addition is Dress Down, which has been really, really important in honestly, being good against almost all of the top decks in the meta right now. And after trying that out, it has been really impressive. And yeah, it's been working out great for me currently. And I also like using lands that are always useful, even if you have like back to basics. I'm playing one Mystic Sanctuary and one Meticulous Archive. Especially the Surveil land has been amazing, where you can just fetch it up. Even if you have back to basics, it doesn't matter. You still get what you want, which is a Surveil, right? Because if you back to basics, the idea is to have your opponent not have lands, and you will always have lands available, so you can just get rid of a land that you don't really need if you can just get a Surveil trigger off of this. So that's currently my deck.
Can you,
Phil?
share
I
with
know
us-
you're going to have a lot of questions.
Yeah, so I have also there's a bunch of things in here that I've experimented with as well, and I'm curious to hear getting to the number of 3 Tamiyo. My question is did you start at 3 Tamiyo and then it always just felt good? And have you found any tension between Tamiyo being the only thing that can have that is a target against something like a Fatal Push, and how you navigate the play patterns with Tamiyo? I presume that there is something that meets the eye that is not the same as if you were playing Tamiyo in Dimir Delver or the Dimir Tempo Shells. I imagine that Tamiyo is used or played differently here in Control than those types of decks, and I'm curious to hear how you particularly find Tamiyo in those types of positions and how you've navigated that. And then I'm just curious also your suite of 22 land, but with 3 Lorien revealed, as opposed to 21 land and 4 Lorien revealed, or 23 land and 2 Lorien revealed, getting to the correct number of Lorien revealeds. I'm sort of front-loading a bunch of these questions so you can go off. And then I'm curious how you got to your Planeswalker suite, because outside of Swords to Plowshares and Dress Down, there aren't any positions of instant speed interaction. And so I'm curious how the Flash of Wandering Emperor, how relevant that becomes, as opposed to it just being the best 4-drop Planeswalker as opposed to anything else, or if the Flash is the thing that actually puts it over the top.
So let me start by talking about Tamiyo. I think that card is probably the reason why I wanted to play Jeskai Control. I think it's the best deck that actually can abuse Tamiyo's ability, because it's just made for the deck, honestly. It's a 1-drop that wins you the game if it's unaddressed, and if there's one thing that Jeskai Control is really good at, is preventing your opponent being able to attack you, right? We have the Monarch as well, so we are very good at doing that. And I've actually started playing 4, but I've recently felt like it was a bit too much. You still 3 feels like a good spot to be in. Also because I needed to make room somewhere for the 4 Narsets and the Days Undoing, etc. So that was the idea where I ended up with 3. But the impact of Tamiyo cannot be overstated how powerful it is. Very often it's not even the flipping the Tamiyo that's important. Very often I deliberately do not flip Tamiyo because I just want to draw an extra card each turn. That can just, in the early game, I've always feel like I'm suddenly a combo deck when I can turn 1 Tamiyo, especially on the play. It's so difficult for my opponents, and it's also good because it's the only creature in the deck that's relevant. Well, sure, there are always exceptions, but generally, people keep in Fatal Pushes against Jeskai Control. If my opponent decides to keep in 2 or 3 Fatal Push against me, I already feel like I've had an advantage, even though sure they can get rid of Tamiyo, but you don't need Tamiyo, right? Very often, even if they Fatal Push my Tamiyo, I'm like, yeah, that's 1 card gone from the hand. That's 1 threat that I don't have to worry about, because the real haymakers are the 3-drops, right? So that's why I really like Tamiyo. Honestly, if you want to play 4, I could see that. I've played 4 myself, but I've landed on 3. We need to cut some cards because I do want to play just 60. I don't want to go to 61 cards, and that's where I ended up. For the land part, I actually started out with 4 Loriens and 18 lands. I felt that was fine, but I did that when I was not playing Meticulous Archive, and I really wanted to have that. So I figured, okay, I'm just going to cut down 1 Lorien, play 1 Meticulous Archive, and honestly, I'm not going back. Meticulous Archive has been so impactful. Sometimes I even use it to bait out Wastelands turn 1, right? You have Plains, Island in the opening hand. I just play the Archive. I get value, and then I hope that they Wasteland, because I've already put myself ahead slightly because I get to see the top of my deck. It's small things like this. There's so many ways you can actually abuse the card. It's amazing. And Lorien, of course, also finds Mystic Sanctuary, which is really great at the. I've done situations where I use Lorien to cycle for an island, get Mystic Sanctuary, put into play, and then put the Lorien I've just cycled back on top to draw 3 cards next turn. That's just amazing magic. Really, really good stuff. And then for the Planeswalkers, I've been playing 3 Narsets and 2 Teferis for a long while now. I think that's mainly because we've had a situation now where combo is very prevalent and still is, honestly. But the format has really been slowing down recently, which is something that I think is good for the format. And with the uptick of Delver, I felt like I really wanted to have another win condition. And to me, the One Ring Emperor is pretty much everything that you want, because you can flash it in instant speed, but you can use it as a removal spell if you need to, like get rid of a Murktide. Really good. But what I also love is when your opponent has something like a Bowmasters, you can flash it in, make a Samurai, block the Bowmasters, get rid of the threat, and have a threat to block an opposing or attack an opposing Planeswalker on the swing back. Really, really nice. And getting the life after you exiled is also not unimportant. It's kind of a catch-all. I like it, and it's also just mono-white, which means that not a single blast can hit this.
Yeah.
Because I've been considering maybe some people like Chase, sure, but that's pyroblastable, and I didn't want that. I want to have, as I always like to try and do, especially with one-offs, search for something that does not get hit by potential counterplay from the sideboard. That's how I came to also playing the Wandering Emperor. And I currently like 4 Narsets because a lot of cards, draw cards these days, pretty much everything. And if you're playing Narsets, it's certainly difficult for your opponent to deal with. It immediately replaces itself. You play it, you draw a card. The amount of times I've played Narset, then just minused, and then I just find another Narset, and they have to like spend Lightning Bolt on a Narset. I'm like, yeah, that's pretty much the best thing that could have happened for me. And don't even get me started about playing Narset. Also have Teferi, and recently on camera I was even able to have like Teferi and then just plus, and in their draw step then use a Days Undoing. It's just so painful. The 3 drops, the Planeswalkers are just so powerful. Yeah, it's what you need to have, right? It's a 3 drop, so it needs to win you the game effectively. So I've really been liking this. Yeah, I think currently in the main deck I would probably not change a single thing. So that's currently. I think that answers all of your questions, Phil.
That actually pre-answers one of my questions, which was, how do you feel about people that are playing Lotus Petal?
Mm-hmm. In Jeskai Control?
Yeah.
Spicy, to say the least. But currently, it's not what I would be wanting to do. You play Control for a reason, and slamming in the Lotus Petal, your deck still will go to the late game. At least that's what you want to be doing. And top decking a Lotus Petal in turn 6 or 7, I could not imagine a more horrible feeling than that. So it's not something that I would personally want to try. I mean, I get why people like it. Playing turn 2 to Ferry, sure, I dig that, but let's be real.
Yeah, I think that's the calculus a lot of people are making is like, do I even get to a point in the game where, like, the feel bad of top decking a Lotus Petal when you needed something else versus do I even get to a point in that game where if I'd have played Narset or if I'd have played Teferi, on turn 2, took over the narrative of the game, would that do it for me? Like, weighing those two out,
I get that, but what would I want to cut for Lotus Petal? I honestly couldn't tell
you. Hey, Legacy fans, since you're enjoying the show, please like and subscribe to the video. It helps the channel grow.
Support Eternal Turtles on Patreon so we can create even more content and cover events.
Patreons get an ad-free RSS feed, 4 bonus episodes a month, and Discord recognition. Join the Dirtle Maniacs at patreon.com/EternalDurtles.
Now back to the show.
Phil?
No, I agree, because I think that the Lotus Petal sentiment and the reason why players were picking it up was actually going against the target that they wanted to do. Like, they felt that they needed to lower their curve, but rather than actually get rid of the tools that were expensive to play stuff that was lower on the curve, they just played Lotus Petal to offset that. But that adds a whole bunch of constraints to like needing to recoup the card in order for Control to actually operate on the axis that it wants to. It's a whole ordeal where I feel like it's 2 different theories sort of clashing and then like not actually meeting like all the way on either end of it, and then just end up to mediocre results for the most part. But if before we can jump into your tournament where you can give us the rundown on like, the details of like how this deck has been operating for you in actual gameplay, I do want to talk about the sideboard and how you came to the numbers that you came to. In particular, I notice a 1-2 back to basic split. So you have 3 back to basics. and the rationale for keeping one back to basics in the main, but then having two in the board. Are there any matchups, or do you think the meta at large, or what you expect to face as the control deck, that back to basics is not going to be the primary tool that's going to help lock them out? Because, like as you said, it being a win condition and balancing how you view how many win conditions you have in your deck at any given point. So I'm looking at the back to basics also as a win condition post board, and so curious how you got to two. Same thing with the consigned to memories. You're playing two consigned to memories, which I feel like most people looking at a control show would presume that feels low. Most people are on at least three if they're in something like Delver that can clock, but then four for the most part if you're a super hard control deck. And then your suite of disruption against combo decks between Damping Matrix and Grafdigger's Cage, and then how you got to that with also with one Rest in Peace. And where did you come to these tools in particular? Why were they your choices? And why did you pick them in the numbers that you chose?
Mm-hmm. That's an excellent question, because that's also what I think is the main thing that I wanted to talk about today. Is the deck list that you're discussing is specifically for paper play, and I cannot stress this enough. I think Jeskai Control right now is an excellent choice. This is not a meme, right? I really think it is an excellent choice, but specifically for paper play, I would not recommend this list for online play. And that's the thing that I think is not talked about enough. That specifically for Legacy, that's at least how it feels to me, the paper meta is so different from the online meta. Yeah. It feels almost like a different game, where I get that, this is like, we've talked about this a lot, that control is dead right now. Sure, I get that. But that's mostly because if you look at the meta online, like I have the MTG Goldfish meta in front of my face right now, it's all combo, right? Sure, because that's most data comes from online play. Now, I don't think that specifically Magic is played more online than in paper, but it is easier to gather results. And how I made this list is I just looked at the Goldfish meta, and if I just look at, for example, now the top 10 decks of the format, and I take out the combo decks, I see Oops All Spells, I see Doomsday, I see Sneak and Show, and Red Stompy, maybe it's not a combo deck, but it tries to win the game resolving one spell, right? So it's a bit combo-esque, if I can call it like that. Now, if I follow these percentages, right, when I was preparing for these two tournaments, for example, in the first weekend, I was playing in a 85-person event. Normally, if I would look at the meta share compared to MTG Goldfish, I would expect 5% to be Oops All Spells, which is around, 4 players, something like that. In paper, I am expecting between 0 to 1 person maybe on Oops All Spells. Usually 0. I don't know if maybe this is a European thing, but I played this weekend in 2 different countries, and I've also played around in Italy, Germany, France as well. It's pretty much the same. People in paper want to feel like they play a longer game. For a lot of people playing in Magic paper tournaments, it's like a day out with their friends. And what you don't want to do is you want to open your hand, win the game with Oops All Spells, and then you have like 45 minutes left. What are you going to do? So usually people playing in paper Magic, they want to make decisions. They want to play as long as they can, and they want to feel like they had a good game. Online, it's not the same, because I can just, with Oops All Spells, I can play 5 games in like half an hour. And if I want to quit for an hour, I just leave my PC and come back. So then it makes sense that you can play Oops All Spells because you're not wasting any time. I don't know if I'm making sense, but that is how I addressed my deck list. And the same is true, by the way, for generally all combo decks. Like Doomsday, this is another deck. And currently at the MTG Goldfish meta, Red Stompy is 11%, the highest rated deck or the highest played amount of deck on there. Like, this is not at all what I was expecting. I was expecting an 80-person event, maybe 1, 2, perhaps 3 players, which is nowhere near 11%. And when I went to the event, I saw 0 Oops All Spells, I saw 0 Doomsday, I saw 2 Red Stompy players. So that really, that emphasized that we have a different game in paper than online. Now, why do I start off with this? Because that's how I prepared my deck list. For example, you've talked about the 2 consigned to memories that I'm playing in the sideboard. I went all in, Phil. I mean, on Saturday, the 85 people event, I had 0 consigned to memories. And I think you can go 2 ways. You can either try and fix the bad matchups as much as you can. And I've done this in the past. Like before the bans, you needed to fix the bad matchups because it was all colorless. Not only did we have Eldrazi, but we also had the Mystic Forge, you had Cloud Posts. Sure, that was a period where I played 2 Back to Basics main, I played another in the sideboard, 2 Harbingers, 4 consigns. Yes, I did that. That's all gone. Pretty much the only colorless deck remaining that I feel is a horrible matchup is Eldrazi, which is true, but that's 5% of the meta. So I think you can go two ways. You can either accept that you're going to lose that matchup, or you can try and adjust. And for Saturday, I went for the route that, you know what, if I face Eldrazi, I'm going to lose. There you go. Which is not entirely true, because I do have Dress Down, I do have Back to Basics, so I could potentially win there. But I decided I'm just going to improve my matchup against anything else. And statistically, I'm only going to face it once, and maybe even 0 times. And in the entire weekend, I faced Eldrazi 0 times. So that's important to note. I just prepared my deck list for paper play, and well, it was paying off. Now, I did go back to Sunday event where I was playing 2 Consigned Memories, but that felt fine. That really felt like the sweet spot to me. And it's important to say all this before I actually go into my sideboard choices, because I do think that this is a list only for paper play. And if I'm playing on Magic Online, I want to play a digital tournament, I would probably change these things. Do you know the decks that I really saw a lot, which I was expecting also a lot? It's basically a lot of fair decks or combo-esque decks. I was expecting to be playing against Blue-Black Reanimator a lot, which is semi-delver because it has a lot of gameplay. You can show you have the I win button, but generally you play Magic. I was also expecting a lot of Rug Delvers, Painters, Nadu or Cephalid Breakfasts, and Stifle Knots. Those were the decks I was expecting. And I think I faced, like, the decks that I just summed up here were probably around 70 to 80% of all my matchups for the weekend, which is normal because these are decks that like playing Magic and like having interaction, etc. So this is why I came to the sideboard. Now, diving into the sideboard, what you need to be afraid of is combo decks, right? Because combo is difficult for control decks. They have always been that way. So when I look at the meta, what are the only combo decks I was expecting a lot? It's usually Blue-Black Reanimator. That was the combo deck that I was expecting the most, and I wanted to beat. So I want to have at least 4 cards in the sideboard specifically for that matchup. And I like diversifying, so of course I think I want to have 1-drop, so Grafdigger's Cage is really good. Also hits like Nadu combo deck, so that's nice. I'm also playing deliberately 1 Rest in Peace, because it also hits Delver. It's also good if you face the Oops All Spells deck, it's also nice, so it has a lot of applications. Also, like if you play randomly against lands, it's paper play, so people play what they want. And then let's think, what was the 4th? Graveyard Containment Priest. Yeah, so that was another one. And they were really good. I faced Blue-Black Reanimator twice, once each tournament, and I won. Whenever, if you open an opening hand with Jeskai where you have 1 piece of graveyard hate, you cannot lose. It's honestly that powerful. Shameless plug here, but I just released a video on my YouTube where I recorded specifically with my latest list, and I faced like 5 fair decks, twice Blue-Black Reanimator, but that's like semi-fair. Lost one of them, won one of them, and it's insane. If you just start an opening hand with a hate piece, it feels almost like the usual Delver deck, which is good for us. So I think once I had that covered, I was looking at, so what other combo decks am I expecting, which is basically Nadu, arguably Painter, Cephalid Breakfast. But I've been playing 1 card that just destroys it all. It's Damping Matrix. I don't know if you know the card. Maybe I should quickly say what it does for people who don't know the card. Damping Matrix is like 3, which is just generic mana, and it says activated abilities of artifacts and creatures can't be played unless they're mana abilities. Card's nuts. Honestly, it just shuts down the entire deck. I played against Nadu Breakfast once on Saturday, and I played against Nadu Combo on Sunday, and I was able to resolve Damping Matrix at a certain point, and they did nothing. Really, nothing anymore. The deck just flops to the card. And if we were going to go draw go for 3 to 4 turns, Jeskai will. That's what we want to do, so we will win. But it's also good against stuff like the Painter deck, because I also resolved against Painter, and same thing, they just can't do anything anymore.
Yeah, they're now a really bad Goblin deck.
Exactly, which is fine. We can handle very bad, slow combo Goblin decks. So I'm playing 2 right now, and I think it has been amazing for me. Just the combination of these 2, like the 4 Graveyard Hate and then the Damping Matrix, solves all the bad combo matchups. Sure, Damping Matrix costs 3, but we do have removal for generally slowing them down, and you can get there, but you have to be careful, of course. And then The rest of the sideboard kind of honestly built itself. The first day, that was a Saturday, it was the list where I was playing the 0 consigns. I was playing 2 Hydroblast instead, but I didn't like him. I almost never brought him in because, as I said, Moonstompy is in paper play not very prevalent. So I had him in the sideboard, and I'm like, this probably should be something else because I think I brought him in once against Delver, and I didn't need them. I think you can play against Delver without them. You don't really need it. So I just cut them, swapped them for consigned memories, and the rest is almost the same. What I do like about your question, to answer your question, Phil, about Back to Basics, is it's a win condition on its own, especially if people don't expect it. And it's rarely a bad card, but in the current meta, it's still fast. I've played usually 2 in the main board, but I've cut down to 1, mainly because I needed room for Dress Down, and I think Dress Down's better right now because all the combo decks I just mentioned also against those matchups, Dress Down's really good. But I like Back to Basics, and with having the 2 consigns, if you do face Eldrazi, it's not like this deck has 0 game against it, but that's mainly because of the Back to Basics. If you can slam it down on turn 3, they are really in trouble. They need exactly what I don't remember the name, but the Eldrazi that can actually get rid of an enchantment. What's the name?
Oh,
like
yes,
Displacer or something.
No, it's possible. Anyway.
Yeah, it's the 2-drop that then you can kick it.
Battle Mage, right? Something
Battle Mage. Yeah, that's the one. But they need specifically that, otherwise they just lose. But what I do think you need to do against Eldrazi is you need to consider Eldrazi as a combo deck when you're playing Jeskai. I will never keep
Battle Mage, by the way.
That's the one. Wastegate Battle Mage. I never keep a hand against Eldrazi that does not have either Back to Basics or Consigned to Memory. You need one of these 2. If you don't have it, it's a combo deck for you. Just get rid of it. Mulligan. So you have to mulligan aggressively. And as I said, the rest of the deck kind of builds itself. Sure, you play the Pyroblasts. I mean, straightforward. Everything's blue, so you want to get rid of the blue stuff and not waste your forces on that if you don't have to. 1 Triumph. I've actually played 2 in the past, but 1 feels like the correct number. Really good against Delver decks. Pretty much any fair matchup, really. And then 1 Wrath of the Skies. Too good not to play, especially against painted decks. Anything that plays Urza Saga. But Urza Saga is not that big of a problem anymore when you're playing 2 Dress Downs, but having another way to get rid of it is really nice. And that pretty much sums it up.
Awesome. One question that I have, and this goes to the timing of which, let me know if your experience is similar, but I found that when you're playing against the decks where white cards do have text, that white cards are critical to the early stages of the game. And I consciously am always thinking to myself that 13 white sources is the minimum that I'm willing to go in my deck. Once I'm at 12 white sources or access to 12 white sources, I feel like I'm sort of now, playing too high on the variance game. Between 2 plains in the Tundra, and then you have 8 fetch lands, and then the 3 Lorien revealed. Was there ever a point where you felt like your color requirement on mana as you were trying to go blue-white early in the game to develop, and then hitting your second blue source for Narset? Did mana development, is there a certain fetch pattern that you will sequence? Is it island, plains, island? Is it usually island, island, plains, and then you sort of overload and recoup? What is it? How do you navigate the early game in terms of your sequencing on what colors you get?
Good question. It's difficult because it really depends on what's in your hand. If I have like 2 to 3 cantrips, I'm feeling safe to get like my islands, but sometimes you have the situations where you have like 1 fetch land and 1 ponder, and you have a bunch of removal spells, and it's painful, but then you just have to accept that, I'm going to have to get Tundra and Ponder here. And if they wasteland me, that really does suck. But I guess that's the game sometimes. It really is. Now, what you mentioned is the reason why I'm no longer playing Wrath of the Skies main. I've been playing 2 Wrath of the Skies main for a long while now, but double white main has been really painful for me getting there. And sure, I'm still playing the Wandering Emperor, which also has double white, but it costs 4 mana. So it's less of an issue because you can fetch up the potential Tundra later. So you have to be careful, and this is why I've put Wrath of the Skies in the sideboard. Usually only bring it in matchups where lands feel a bit safer. But generally, the fact that you also have the Lorien reveals make it that you can keep opening hands with only a mountain in there are suddenly fine, because you can just fetch up the Lorien revealed and fetch up an island with that. So I didn't have a lot of issues with the mana, but that's, again, because you will not face as many combo decks when you're playing in paper, which it can become a bit more difficult. I've recently gone back to Meticulous Archive because before the bans, I was actually playing Double Tundra because we need to be fast. But as I said, if the format slows down, you can be a little bit slower with your mana, and that's why I've gone back to Meticulous Archive. But it is definitely one of the most difficult things to learn with this deck, when to fetch up which land. Which again, shameless plug, latest YouTube video. That was it's very cool with this deck how sometimes fetching up with a certain land can be so difficult. So it's also fun. It's like a small mini game when playing the deck.
Yeah, it's sort of counterintuitive that people think, oh, it's easy because you're a basic heavy mana base, so you don't really fear Wasteland all that much. But being a basic heavy mana base also means that you can't necessarily always fire off all of the spells that you would like to in the sequence that you want to. You have to think of it like a couple turns ahead. I want to talk a little bit more about Tamiyo here, because post-board, at least looking at the list that you're talking about before, where I see like, if once we have a matchup where considering all the white cards that we have, the deck is actually pretty low on counter magic. You have the 4 Force of Will and 1 Force Negation, and then you could theoretically say that Dress Down in some situations can function as a counterspell, depending on what it's lining up against. But then post-board, you do have several blasts, but then that's kind of it. There isn't any additional Force of Negations. There's no Flusterstorms or anything like that. And I'm curious as to where in your thought process, if at all, is the access to counter magic and how much you would like to have, because you have 5 counter spells main, and then you have access to Tamiyo to pick up the counter spells. And so I'm curious, is that typically what Tamiyo is doing? Is Tamiyo more often than not picking up a Force of Will, or is Tamiyo really just slotted for additional removal spells because that's where the bread and butter is when you get to sit down and actually line up white spells against certain opponents?
The answer is yes. That's the main thing about Tamiyo. I just love the card because of the versatility, because there's even a third option, which is just attacking with it and then just drawing a card each turn. So that's the cool thing about Tamiyo. She's flexible, so you can pretty much do with her whatever you want and what the situation requires you to do. And I've had situations where I've been taking up Tamiyo for like 3 or 4 turns, and I've even, when Tamiyo was at 8, I just draw a card from the graveyard because that's what I currently needed to do. Because imagine I had 0 protection, I -8, and then they or -7, and then they just flash in Bowmasters. That's not going to happen to me. I'd rather pick up the swords, just plus again, and then minus when you're safe, because that's what you need to do as a control deck. You have time, use the time, play careful, and don't lose. That's basically what you need to accept. That's going to be a learning process, how not to lose.
Control, don't lose.
Exactly. You will win the late game always. Just chill. Trust me, that was difficult for me in the beginning because I'm used to trying to win as fast as possible. That's a different mindset. Now for the sideboard, it's true, there's not a lot of counter magic in here, but that's just my gameplay. I really enjoy from the sideboard having silver bullets. Just, I play this card, your deck probably does almost nothing anymore, and the thing that it still can do is just my main deck will be able to deal with this. We've talked about this, as I said before, when you're playing against Blue-Black Reanimator, if you have Graveyard Hate, you will win the game. The rest of your deck is strong enough. Like against Nadu or Painters, I have the Damping Matrices. If I resolve that, fine. I don't need counter magic anymore because I have just a way to stop you from doing your thing. And then you have like the generic Pyroblast because they can just hit everything. And for us, it's all, I consider this all to be silver bullets. Same with Back to Basics, right? If I'm facing lands, I don't need counter magic when I can just back the basics and prevent you from doing anything else. Arguably, I think Consign to Memory is also one of those silver bullets because, like, if I am facing random storm, I can just consign the storm trigger. That's also very nice. Same with, honestly, Dress Down too. Like against Doomsday, you can just Dress Down. It's also a silver bullet. So this was my reasoning for the sideboard. I wanted to have cards that are as impactful as I possibly can, which is why I don't feel the need to play more counter magic. But again, if I was tuning this deck for Magic Online play, I would probably slot in, well, I'd probably play 2 Force Negations main and then maybe 1 or 2 Flusterstorms in the sideboard. But for paper play, I don't think you need it as much, and that's how I came to the sideboard.
And then the last question before letting you talk about specific interactions with against particular kinds of matchups, like how you sideboard for them, and general mapping. Of course, there's intricacies of specifics if they show you in game, but general mapping. But I want to ask for 4th Aerolingus, when you are Do you have a time where you're like, oh, I've noticed that I typically end up casting this for X equals 3, X equals 4? Is there a position in the game where you, like, somebody coming to the deck for the first time goes, okay, I have now hit my 6th land drop. This is more or less where Fenris Cloud told me is the position where typically this card is going to be cast for its optimal value based on like where we get to in the game and how like the deck actually closes. Where is X normally?
Honestly, the answer is there is no normally, because again, the card is so flexible that I really like playing 4th Elingas relatively early. I think that's one of the things that I do very often that I don't see many people do, is I have played a lot of 4th Elingas turn 3, because I really love the situation where, especially if I'm on the play, like turn 1, I don't know, ponder, hopefully find force. They play a threat on which I can get rid of turn 2, sorry, and then hopefully I can force another threat that they play, and then I just turn 3 4th Elingas, and me drawing 2 cards each turn will win me the game. So it's another way to, you don't need creatures per se to win, because you can get it back, etc., etc. You need the card advantage going. So, but that's rare. You usually play it a bit later, and also the other way around. I've had opening hands after Mulligan to 6 where I just put 4th Elingas on the bottom, because I'm like, yeah, I need to take control of the game first, and I don't want to die with a useless card in my hand. So it really depends. So I don't think there is a general way when you should be playing 4th Elingas. It depends on the hand, and I'm probably sounding like a broken record right now, but that's pretty much the entire deck. I don't think where it was in effect it's a bit easier when generally, like on the draw, if you're on the draw you start with Noble, on the play you start with Glistener Elf. Again, that's not always true either, but it is general rules of thumb. Jeskai Control has a lot less of those, at least in my experience.
When for those times, do you notice that there's any particular amount of, like, because we were talking about mana sequencing, and if you are in those positions where you're like, okay, I have access to 4th Elingas potentially as my turn 3 play, does that stress, or how much stress, if any, does it feel like it applies to the volcanic island in particular? And I ask that question because the mana sequencing that is required, obviously island and plains is going to be early because that's the stuff that's, cantripping and removing whatever they play in the early turns. But then once you get to turn 3, having double blue for Narset or access to red for 4th Elingas, it applies a lot of stress to that volcanic island. And I wonder if that has been felt at all, or is it more or less that the deck is pretty insulated at making sure that if you need to get to a little bit more time, that there isn't really much tension once you hit that 3rd turn?
I feel like it's the latter.
Yeah.
Not always, but if I can give you one rule of thumb, as long as you don't have 4th Elingas in your opening hand, just do not fetch up the volcanic. That's basically my rule. If you do end up needing it or wanting to play 4th Elingas, you will be able to do that then, because especially in the main deck, you play 2 cards that require red, right? So do not fetch it up if you don't need to. And even then, I feel very often I have situations where I'm like, yeah, I could have used this 4th Elingas, but I can wait. I don't have a land, it's fine. So if you can, just fetch up your basics. Playing around Wasteland is important. So that's if in an ideal world, I would never want to play a single duel if I don't have to, because there's also 1 mountain in here. But yeah, usually there's not a lot of stress on when you want to be playing the 4th Elingas. After sideboard, you bring in 3 blasts sometimes. I have situations, for example, against Delver specifically, you just need to get the volcanic because you want to have access to blue and red to Pyroblast Delver. Yeah, you need to do this sometimes, but that's Delver's a strong deck, so as we know, sometimes we have to play into their days. Sometimes we have to make them have the wasteland. If they don't, nice, but that's magic.
While we still have a little bit of time left, I would like to just know: do you have a general sideboard mapping against the top decks, similar to like what do you do against Blue Red Delver, what do you do against Reanimator? I personally am very curious what you do against any deck that is playing any number of 4 drops, because I find that a really stiff bottleneck when playing Control is how good Prismatic Ending is, and Prismatic Ending not being able to go up to a 4th color in the way that it can in the Bean Shells. I come up against a lot. Like, you end up feeling that more whenever somebody's playing a Karn deck or anything like that. So I'm curious as to what your sideboard plan is there. Can you just walk us through the metagame?
Before he goes into that, I just wanted to say, because we always are trying to plug other content creators on here as well, is Sam does a really good job on his Patreon of giving you like a really good breakdown of not only the what comes in, what comes out, but also the whys of that. So if you're part of Sam's Patreon, you get a really good idea in that world.
Should caveat too, if that's just something that we say, hey, if you actually want to learn how Famous Cloud sideboards here and not do it in the open here, like I also understand that as well.
Oh no, I'm fine talking about that because I can't talk you through the entire sideboard map because yes, I do that. I do of all the top 15 decks of the meta. I always do every month. I do a sideboard map for both Legacy Jeskai, Legacy Infect, and Modern Infect. So if you're interested, go check it out. But I kind of lost your question.
I'm just curious, like, let's say broad strokes against particular formats. How do you board typically against the Ancient Tomb decks? How do you board against the Dark Ritual decks? And then how do you board against the Days Wasteland shells?
Okay, so generally, Days. Let me start by saying the Days Wasteland shells. Of course, what you want to do is you want to be efficient. That's pretty much the idea. So there are a couple of cards that I think are just generally always good against low to the ground decks, which is Triumph. They want to kill you as soon as possible if you can get the Triumph online. It only requires you to have 2 mana. Sometimes you will draw it. Doesn't happen very often, but that kind of sucks. But you have Brainstorm. You will be able to put it back on top. You also have the Wrath of the Skies. You have the Blasts. Any card that costs 1 mana to cast is good in those matchups. And generally, I really hate counter magic against Delver specifically. So Force Negation, Force of Wills, you just swap them for Blasts. They are a lot better. And if you survive 3 to 4 turns, that's when you start taking over the game, right? Your Teferi's are basically also removal spells. Your Narsets are so difficult for them, they have to get rid of it. So that's what you want to do. You want to survive 3 to 4 turns, and then you'll be fine. That's the idea. Against the most difficult ones are the combo decks, of course. It still depends because the blue-black Delver deck is also a combo deck, but that's fine because we have Graveyard Hate, but we dedicate 4 sideboard slots to those. So if you survive the first 2 turns, it just becomes a Delver deck, and we've seen that we can perfectly manage those. Which are the scary ones is Oops All Spells. That's something that I'm afraid of. I think that's one of the more difficult matchups. Now, again, that's why I'm playing Dress Down. It's very often Oops. They think that they have time against control, which is true. I get that, but they, I found that very often they just try to go off turn 1, 2 because they want to Thoughtseize you first, or they want to get something from your hand. But if you have Dress Down, I'm perfectly fine forcing a Thoughtseize because they always think, "Yep, it's time to go. We are safe," and then you can just Dress Down. That feels really, really good, really impactful. And then Consign to Memory is also nice because it hits all the combo decks, or at least almost all the combo decks. And we've talked about like Carnforge decks, etc. Consign to Memory is really good there. And that's true for pretty much every single deck that tries to play stuff that costs 4. And Ancient Tomb decks, that means they play Ancient Tombs or City of Traitors, so Back to Basics comes online. That's why I'm playing 2. I've gone up to playing 3, so 1 in the main, 2 in the side. And I've also played Ruination in the sideboard, and I've gone up to 4 Consign to Memories. Depends a bit how the meta shifts, but I feel right now, as I said, this is a deck tuned for paper, so you don't have to respect those decks as much, but when you do face them, it's not like you don't have game. But mulligan aggressively, they are combo decks, so you need to mulligan very, very aggressively. And if you, like, for instance, against like the Carnforge deck, because when it was the best deck in the format and they played the Baubles, that was the time when I was playing the 4 Consigns and all the Back to Basics. I still had a very positive record against the deck because Consign to Memory made it so you could get to turn 3 and then you can Back to Basics, and then they can't come back from that, usually. So that's the main idea how I sideboard.
Cool. Well, Sam, I don't want to cut you off. I know there's a lot more that we could talk about with this deck, but I think that's a good like primer for everybody to check out as far as the deck is concerned. And we want to have you back on, a little bit closer to some of the larger events that are coming up this year. Do you have any big events coming up on your side of the woods?
Good question. This weekend was the one that I was preparing for because I really wanted to qualify for ELM, which I didn't do, unfortunately. I don't know, honestly. I haven't looked ahead because it's always, I have a small child, so a bit of planning involved. But I think the first one that's coming up, but that's not really soon, is Eternal Mania, which is in August, which is in Belgium, by the way. I'm from Belgium. Oh. And it's this year, Eternal Mania will be hosting the European Legacy Masters. So that's probably the biggest one coming up. That's popped into my head first. But then we have the 4 Seasons in Italy, which I'm definitely going to try and play one of them. That's peak magic, I think, in Italy, if you ask me.
We're going to try and get out to Eternal Week in Europe this year. So maybe
lovely.
we'll actually
That would
get
be
to
cool.
meet you in person.
That would be awesome. That would really be awesome. Yeah.
You know, that's what 10 months out. So we'll
I think so,
We'll
yeah.
see how things go.
Yeah.
You know, that's going to be one of those, like, you know, if our Patreon subscribers get us to a point where we can save enough money, we'll do it. But yeah, with that said, Sam, again, thanks so much for coming on. We really
Thanks for
appreciate
having
your
me.
insight into Jeskai Control, and we will catch you guys next time.
Bye.
Hey, if you enjoyed this episode, hit the subscribe button. It grows the legacy content ecosystem we all love by relaying to the platform that you are part of our passionate community.
And to go even further, click the links for subscription or to support directly via Patreon to help us create more content for you. Patreon supporters get 4 exclusive extra episodes per month. If you're listening on an audio platform, head over to patreon.com/eternaldurdles.
Thanks so much for your support.
We'll see you in the next one.